able to learn in the course of this chat. Okay, I'm hoping that we all engage, make it a somewhat conversational rather than just a one-sided monologue, right? So, but in terms of what we're doing today, the sort of outline for today and what I intend to teach or share is first I want us to look at policies first as a tool for change. Okay, so we are talking about policies. Why is it important at all? So let's look at it first as, okay, firstly, it's something that would help us achieve whatever change we're looking to get. Also, we'll also be looking at why. I think the four major questions: why, what, how, and when, is what we would. That's how I've sort of structured this journey. Why, what, how, and when. In relation to the why, we're going to ask ourselves, why are we interested in change in the first place? Why do we think there's a need to even engage in change? All right. And before we start thinking of policies, because we believe that policies are really like a vehicle to bring about change or to sustain a positive status quo. So that's the whole point of policies. But before we get to that phase, why are we interested in change? And then this will help us, it will delve a bit further and look into what I refer to as the normative framework. It's a common term in political science and something that we need to be mindful of if we're thinking of any significant and lasting change in Africa as a whole. So what is our own normative framework? So that's the first question we'll be dealing with after having a general overview of policies and what we think they are. And then we would now look at what we think needs to change. Okay, because a lot of times, and you would all agree with me, I believe, when we're discussing the concerns in Africa, a lot of times it's relatable. We have gone through some of the challenges ourselves, but in terms of discussing the problem and preferring a solution, it somewhat hovers around the abstract realm, right? But we don't actually take the next step from that abstract realm of discussion to now make it concrete and then work out a clear solution. So that's one other thing that we're going to look at is, okay, what exactly is it that we're looking to change? And how is this question important in affecting the change and so on? And then thirdly, we're going to look at how do we then facilitate this change. Now, all of these feed into whatever policy framework we're eventually going to suggest or recommend. These questions, starting from the very beginning of understanding what policies are in the first place. And if you permit me, I'm using the term policy in a very loose sense, in a very broad sense. So I'm not looking at it in the restricted organizational sense of policy. So I'm just looking at it as a framework of actions that either governments or nations or any person can put together in order to sort of make that their statement of culture or their behavior pattern and so on. So that's what I mean when I'm referring to policy. So you just understand that terminology. Excuse me. So now we'll look at how we're going to facilitate this change, and it's what I call PDP process. That already seems like it's dead on arrival. I've been aligned to one of our popular political parties. But anyways, that's just a side talk. But it doesn't mean a People's Democratic Party. It means policy design process. Okay, so I'm referring to alignment in the policy design process. There has to be some strategic alignment, right? for us to actually facilitate the change. So that means that the design of the policy, that is the policy itself, the content of the policy itself, has to be technically aligned. The plan for it to be implemented has to be aligned with the relevant stakeholders for it to have any meaning or have any relevance in the long term. And the implementation has to be institutionally aligned. That means that whichever organization or people or body that is actually going to take the policy from the abstract phase or the white paper phase or whatever it is, was going to take it from that document phase to actually reality, something that actually now has a real impact in the lives and of the people and the society. That the body that would be charged with that responsibility have to have the capacity to actually discharge that policy. So we'll look at how we can go through this process. And then lastly, we'll see when do we actually effect this change. So I'm hoping that this is somewhat practical and not really motivational as such. I'm not looking to demotivate, but I'm thinking, how can we really look at it in a practical sense and see how we can actually make this work? All right, so that's it. So let's go into understanding policies as tools for change. Okay. First of all, what is effective change? If we're talking about change, what exactly? How can we effect change, and how can we make sure that the change is actually effective? So that brings us to for it to be effective, for change to be effective, or for it to also be sustainable, the process from the point of actually conceiving the idea to the point of actually completing it has to have three core things. One, it has to be intentional. Second, the solution has to be consistent. And then there has to be some fidelity to the original plan. That means you have to stick to the plan. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be flexibility or so on and so forth, but you have to start with ensuring that it's intentional, it's consistent, and then you sort of there's some level of fidelity to the plan, that you apply it as was conceived. A lot of times we see policies that have come to light, and we'll probably touch on a few as we discuss. Policies that have come to light that didn't work. And it's not because the policies themselves were bad, but they were not the change that brought about that the implementation was not really aligned, or did not really reflect the intention of the conceivers of that particular change movement. If we recollect, a few years ago, there was a campaign that was heralded by the campaign slogan of change. Now the question is, what was the change that was intentioned, and how consistent were we in adjusting to that change that was intentioned, and how did we apply? So it's a whole process. So you have to commence from, first of all, understanding what needs to change. So understand the status quo. Understand the status quo. Sometimes, the change that you conceive, the change that you envisage might be unnecessary. Yeah. So first of all, understand the status quo to know whether there is a need for an intervention. And if there is a need for an intervention, then you conceive a clear intervention, and then you prepare, preparing the new actions that you've conceived, the plan for, carrying out whatever was conceived, and then implementing the change plan, reinforcing the desired change by, gathering, analyzing feedback. So it's a back and forth thing. It's not one of you come up with a a potential solution like a messiah and then you leave. No, you still have to work it through the process and identify gaps, and whatever unintended consequences might arise as a result of that solution that someone has preferred, and then you adjust as needed. So there has to be a truthful reflection on the previous status quo and the current status quo that you're trying to bring about, or the status quo that you're trying to entrench, and to see whether the change you're looking to bring would actually bring about the desired status quo that you're looking for. So this intervention, the plans, the new action, the consistent repetition of these actions with fidelity to the original plan is what we loosely would refer to as policies. Okay, so that's what it is. I know we're traditionally familiar with the term policies and procedure. And generally speaking, the term policy and procedures refer really to documentation of these ingredients that I've explained to you. So you're looking at the intervention, the planned action, the consistent repetition of that, and so on. So they refer to these ingredients, and these ingredients are somewhat like a prescription of how you want to run your organization or how you want to run the nation. So that's what you're thinking of. So if you're thinking of a policy to change something, you have to have these things I've discussed, and then how do you want to implement it at the end of the day. So this documentation that really houses behaviors or actions that you intend to put in place in order to bring about a new reality for yourself or for the nation or for the organization. This document that houses all of that is what could also be referred as to your statement of culture. Now, when we are looking at, in the course of this program, I'm sure we dealt with history, legacy, with culture, and all of that. Culture is so important because no matter what your plans are, no matter how fantastic your vision is, no matter how great all of those things are, if you do not have the requisite behavior or patterns that would bring about a reality that we seek, then it's not going to happen, because we don't rise to the aspiration of our goals. We really fall to the level of our processes, to the standard of our processes. So on that premise, you engage policies, you engage behavioral patterns in an organization or in a nation from a well-intentioned viewpoint, and then we carry on, and that's how you bring about it. So it is expected that the entire gamut of stakeholders in the organization or in the nation or that are going to be impacted by that particular policy then follow the dictates of that document. So that document, in a sense, represents a social contract. Now, every person all citizens in a democratic society are free moral agents, is what we say. So every person is sovereign in themselves. So you can make a decision to do what you wish and how you wish, then do it how you wish. So there is that sovereignty. So for you to engage but when you engage in a contract with another person, you have consented to attaining of your sovereignty to a certain extent. So if I am free to drive my car whichever way I wish, but if I decide to sell it to Mr. A, from the moment that I carry out that transaction, there is a restriction to my freedom to engage with the car as I wish. And now there is a social contract that we all get into when we elect our representatives to office. Okay, we have consented, we've entered into some sort of social contract. And so to some extent, our liberties are now curbed to the extent of our consent to certain provisions in a policy. So if a policy then says this, that, and that, you're then restricted in acting in a way that is contrary to this, that, and that. So it's a social contract that gives rise to certain rights and also gives rise to certain obligations. So for a policy to work, it is important that the parties or the relevant stakeholders know that they have consented to that kind of policy, either directly or indirectly, either signing it personally or through the agency of the ballot box. So you have to understand that you've been part of that political process, that now dictates to the extent that extend the way you work and so on. So policy is a behavioral agreement. Okay, it's a behavioral, it's an agreement on how the people who are engaged in that policy would behave. So that is it. So let's just understand the concept, all right? So this is just an agreement. Really is a statement of culture, but really it's a behavioral agreement as to how you would behave. Procedure, on the other hand, is the step-by-step instructions on how policies can be achieved. Okay, step-by-step guidelines on how you can bring about the objective of a particular policy, or how you can adhere to policy. So the policy somewhat defines the rule, and the procedure defines what is expected of each person that is involved in that and how they're expected to deal with that. So Africa as a whole is in dire need to revisit a lot of our behavioral agreements. All right, and we haven't looked at it from that, but I think if we look at it from a simplistic sense like that, then there is a sense of responsibility that is now shared across board. So we need to sort of revisit our agreement, our patterns of practices in order to achieve the renaissance that we're looking to achieve. So that's what really policies are. So that's understanding the concept of policy and the concept of change. So let's go on to the next topic here, which is, why are we interested in the change? Now, this is an interesting question, and I'm going to throw it open in a bit, but I'll throw it open in a minute so that we'll all discuss why we're interested in this change. But let me just say a few things before I go on. When you think of change, all right, and why we're interested in it, again, it's a kind of question that I think one person's answer would be different from the next. And one person's answer would be a reflection of their context. Okay, so a politician who is seeking power could be interested in change for diverse reasons. All right, because maybe then it's their turn. They want it's their turn. We should change government. It's as simple as that. But then there could be more poignant reasons. There could be more important reasons why people are interested in change. But at the end of the day, it boils down to our understanding our normative framework. And I said I was going to discuss that in a bit. So let us understanding what it is about us. What is it about our outlook to life that makes us irate about the status quo? Why can't we stand the way things are? What is it that is making us angry? Okay, and it's pushing us to seek change. Now, this is a Saturday morning, and I bet that there's a million and one things that everybody here could do with their time. But there's something that has caused you to be concerned about the state of affairs within your immediate society, within Nigeria, within Africa as a whole. There's something that's pushed you, that's triggered your curiosity and positive, anger against the way things are. But the answer to this question really lies in understanding our normative framework. What is our makeup? All right, our normative framework would really shape how we are discontent with the status quo, and it sort of makes us yearn for the change. And it also helps us fashion the pathway to the change and also the content of the change, how the change is. So it's not so much about the change as it is about us. The saying goes, we are the change that we seek, and so on. Now, we'll bring all this down to something a bit more practical, but I just want us to understand normative frameworks. Now, this is one of the key difference between various societies in the world, okay? Without a clear understanding of your normative framework, then you can just hop from one particular, for lack of a better word, sect to another sect, all right? Or one political party to another political party, because there's no sense of your own personal ideals. So what is it that, what is our normative framework? So let us have a closer look at what normative frameworks are, because these would, to a great extent, determine the kind of society that we're looking to, to live in. So let's understand, let's have a closer look at what kind of society we want to live in. I did say initially that everybody's gonna answer this differently. The way we see the world, and how we want the world to be formed to a great extent is a reflection of our culture, is a reflection of our history, it's a reflection of our values, and a reflection of our exposure as well. All right, so that's it. How do we understand all of those things? So they're diverse, but at the same time, common perspectives to society and how it should work. All right, so we'll understand it in a bit, but I'm just trying to just lay the groundwork so we can move on to something a bit more practical. So there are diverse ways that people perceive the society and perceive Africa, perceive the world, perceive our immediate environment. No two people have the same perspective, but yet there are common perspectives that we could all align ourselves to and find our diversity within that common perspective. So it is up to us to first locate what our ideals are, and it's one of the exercises I want us to leave here doing. What are our ideals? What are our perspectives? What is our value system? Once we understand that, that will reflect in the kind of policy we design, and that will reflect in the kind of policy we seek to implement and how we seek to implement it. It would reflect on the trade-offs that we make and the trade-offs that we are determined not to make because of how entrenched our ideals are on a particular thing. So our ideals, our perspective, our value system to a great extent would help us fashion the policy framework that will bring about a society that we are looking to live in. Now, these ideals, perspective, a value system is what I refer to as our normative framework. All right, and oftentimes these are sort of influenced by what I say, our history, our religion, our philosophy, our culture. They influence what our ideals are to a great extent. But before I go into the various specifics of what these normative frameworks are, so they can vary from various groups. Okay, so the way a particular group of people view things will be different from the way another particular group view things. Okay, so but one thing is common. We all want similar things. Okay, we want the same. We want material and physical well-being. We want security from physical and economic risk. We're looking for that. We're all looking for a capacity to engage effectively in the society. We have a desire for dignity. We have a desire for respect, and we all have similar needs. But the approach to get these are oftentimes influenced by what our core frameworks are. So we're just going to do a few, just throw a question out there. It's an old philosophy. What I say, a moral tension that goes on in relation to how we all see life and all. I'll just pause my screen for a second and just have a discussion with everybody and just ask a few questions, and then I'll share a case with you that reflects these various perspectives, and then we'll go carry on. All right, so far I hope we're just following. I know it's just been a lot going on, but I hope we're following the line of thinking so far. So I'm going to ask a few questions, and just for the sake of discussion now. If you're driving down the road, okay, if you're driving down the road and in the course of your journey driving down the road, you discover that your car has the brakes in the car has just failed, and so you can't halt the car. It's just going to keep going. And further down the road are 5 workmen who are, if you don't veer off the road, they're definitely going to be hit. And at the speed you're going, there's a 99% certainty that all 5 of them would not survive the accident. You also have an option to veer off, but if you veer off, there is another guy who's not in your way at all. All right, if you veer off, you would crash into that guy who's off the road. He's not on the road like the 5 guys who were just at the end of the walkman. You would crash into him, and there's a certainty that he would die. What decision would you make? And this would make sense in a bit in terms of understanding what our normative framework is. How do you decide what to do in that instance? And I'm just going to leave it open to everybody to just let me know what your thoughts are. What would you do in that circumstance? If you're driving, if you don't veer off, you're going to kill the 5 people. If you veer off, you're going to kill someone who was not even in harm's way before. What would you do in that instant? Just leave it open. Anybody wants to give a go? Yeah, Richard, thank you. Go on, man.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much for laying out some basics in terms of the roadmap for this session. It's quite exciting, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Let's step back to your question. I think there are some preliminary questions before the actual question of veering off the road or not.
Okay.
That should have been considered by all parties, from the driver as well as the persons who are acting or behaving perhaps in a manner in which they shouldn't be in a road that is pliable by motorable vehicles. And this is what you're talking about in terms of the normative framework, which has to do with designs, behaviors, values, principles, protocols, mitigations, all put in place as collaboration and communicated through education and engagement, so everyone understands the part they play in order to create that society that is safe and the society that is that diminishes the risk of this type of situation occurring, or even if it does, the risk of occurrence and the consequences is as low as reasonably practicable or possible. So what's my question then? My question is, firstly, the highways agencies or those who are responsible for that particular road as part of their design and information and education should have put in place very clear road signages in terms of the maximum speed that is permissible on that particular road.
Okay. Can I cut in a bit, Richard?
Absolutely.
So I get what you're saying. So you're thinking very holistically, and you want to solve the problem, but it's just an exercise of a way in of making trade-offs. Okay,
Yeah.
so I get what you're saying, and certainly assuming the right conditions on the road and all of that stuff you're saying, perhaps the situation is avoidable. Let's assume that everything is right. No laws have been broken. It's an excellent society, right? But you're faced with this decision, and it's just a pure accident, and the men on the road are workmen dealing with a particular part of the road. So let's assume that there are no issues with that. How would you make a decision? So just like Tega has said, she would put casualty in mind, and the minimal the casualty, the better. So Tega, do I understand what you're saying is that you would veer off to kill the guy on the side of the road in order to save the 5? Is that your position, Tega? Okay, I can maybe I can hear, but I guess that's Tega's viewpoint. So, and Richard, back to you now. Before I get back to Tega, what would you do, assuming all is well? How would you make a decision as to what direction you take?
Well, my
just two options: to veer off or to go. Not solving the problem, but you had two options: either to veer off or to go. How would you make that decision?
Well, my decision will be to veer off, because it's not eliminating it, but therefore reducing the casualty outcomes.
Okay, so this is so excellent. And does anybody have a different perspective? So what we're saying here is that in order to, whatever does the greater good, okay, even though the acting itself is not inherently correct, because the guy on the side is not in harm's way at all. But the other guys were in harm's way, and so on and so forth. But anyways, you decide that for the sake of saving 5, let 1 go. Okay, so that is the line of thinking I'm getting here. Does anybody think differently or think that there's something wrong with that approach? Does anybody have a slightly different, just interrogate it, does anybody have slightly different approach to that? Okay, so I'm assuming we're all aligned. So let me give the same question in a different way. Assuming you then go to your a doctor, all right, you're a doctor and you're dealing with surgery, transplant surgeon, you're a transplant surgeon, right? And you're at work, and then 5 people are rushed into the hospital who are in need of various key parts of their body. One needs a liver transplant, another heart transplant, another, they all need 5 different key organs. All right, 5 people, and if they don't get it, they're going to die. In the other side of the room is another guy who's come to your surgery that day, just for a regular checkup, and he's just there chilling, and he has all his organs in place, but somehow, you're thinking, how is this different from the car situation? Would you take the 5 organs from this guy who's just in your office on a regular checkup, probably taking a nap, right? Would you take it in order to save these 5 people? Would you make the same kind of decision? It's not as simplistic as that, but how do you make that kind of decision?
I think in a medical...
how would your answer be different from the last one if you're thinking to be minimalist in the casualty? So you have 5 people who would die in the sport, but you can take organs from someone who is leaving, and that person could die, but at least you save 5 people.
In the medical world, it's quite different. It's called triaging.
Yeah.
Where you put the risk of survival, the greater the propensity of survival, the best placed your decision is in terms of where you plow your resources.
Yeah.
So it's slightly different in that sense. Hence, if you go to the medical world, they triage such situations to give a greater chance to the person who is likely to make it through the particular situation or predicament they face at that point in time.
Okay. Okay. So again, at the end of the day, you're trying to minimize casualty. So in answering this question, because I'm trying to divorce the scenarios I'm giving as purely hypothetical, not realistic, and I'm not trying to paint it against society or against any section of society, but I'm just trying to see how we approach decisions. And then go back to what I was trying to talk about, different normative frameworks that would then feed into how we design policy. So the point I'm making, there's an old case in 1884, an old English case here, the Queen against Dudley and Stevenson. In that case, there were 4 people on a voyage. They were on a yacht in the middle of the sea, and they had a problem, and so they couldn't go on. And in their ability not to go on, that means they were stranded in the middle of the sea for days, and they had not enough. They didn't have enough supply of food. And there's a real case that happened in England in the 1800s. So they didn't have enough supply of food, and so they were all stuck. So Dudley, Stevenson, and then the captain of the crew, and then the 4th guy, a 17-year-old boy named Parker. Now Parker was this his first time on going on a sea voyage, and he was excited about the whole thing, but then he's caught up in this unfortunate situation. And in the midst of them being stranded for days, he goes on to drink the seawater. And that even escalated his dire condition, because he was now even feeling worse and was weak. And they had, this is exactly how it works. They had turnips, they had just a few stuff which they ate until they were completely without food. And then Dudley and Stevenson suggested that since Parker is already weak, why don't we kill Parker and eat him up in order to save the rest of us? Because the rest of us, at least we have families, we have families back home and all of that. But Parker is a young 17-year-old boy, nobody would miss him, and so on and so forth. And so let us get rid of him in order to save the rest of us. That was the thinking that they had, and they actually killed Parker and ate him. And so they were taken to court, because after a couple of days they were rescued, and so they didn't die, and so they were taken to court. And it stirred the views of different people, because some people felt, well, what they did was reasonable. Some said the act in itself was inherently bad, because you cannot, murder is murder, whether or not it saves a lot. The question is, if Parker's death would have saved 100 people, would it be justifiable to kill him at that time? And so on. So these are various schools of thought that formed the various, that formed the normative framework as we know it generally in terms of philosophy and so on, understanding who we are and understanding how decisions are made. And this decision that they made was really with the mindset of saving the greatest number of people at the expense of a fewer set of people. Now, all of these illustrations that have been given are just really to superimpose them into political processes, because these form the underpinning thinking that structures any political party or any political organization. So I'll just go back to my slides and explain this framework before I move on to the rest of things, so you understand a little bit more what I was saying. So I share my screen now. take it from there. All right, so the different normative frameworks that exist, okay, both at the national level and global level. And some of the core ones which I would be looking at and sort of explaining to you are what we call the capabilities, the utilitarian, and what we call the justice approaches. Now, these approaches, and then they're universally applicable if you look at it in the way people think. And there's a whole lot more. Some are of African origin, and some are Western, some are Asian. So the global, their history is global, but the point is they're applicable in every situation. So in most political situations. So let's look at the capabilities approach. Now, this is really about this particular framework of thinking is expanding the opportunity to live a fulfilling life across multiple dimensions. It's a framework, you know, like I said in the previous slide, whilst we have various ways of thinking, there are also common frameworks in which our different framework could align. But the common one of which is this capability approach. So what this approach is really expanding opportunity so that people have an equal chance to live a fulfilling life across multiple dimensions. So it focuses, if you're looking at deprivation, is looking at the lack of opportunities in order to how can you deal with the lack of opportunities or deprivations? How can you create a policy that seeks to rectify situations where individuals or groups do not have access to valued opportunities? How can you create equal opportunities across board? So you're thinking of how can we see, so the focus of that ideology for that particular sect is equal opportunities across board. So how do we focus on education? How do we focus on healthcare? How do we focus on security? Now, this is somewhat, when I finish explaining this, you'll see some of the gap that we have in the Nigerian context or in the African context is because we do not usually start from this normative framework approach. And so we have people who can just today in one party, tomorrow in another party, because there are no entrenched ideals that really form their pattern of thinking. All right. So if you look at the SDG goals, you can look at it as one of these, which is trying to see, you know, the goals are, you know, they're talking about various collective aspirations, which have the objective of creating opportunities you know, across various targets. Now, the whole point of this is to see that there's equal opportunity, but not necessarily that there will be equal outcome. So in other words, people can decide to take advantage of the opportunity, but the extent of your success is tied to your capacity. All right, it's tied to how you can do as a person. Now that would then influence the way you even the people who hold this approach to policy making. It would influence the way they make decisions. So if you look at it, if you're trying to take it to maybe to the West and look at maybe the US or the UK and look at maybe the Republican Party or the Conservative, they sort of align more to this approach. It's different from what the Democrats or the Labour Party, their normative framework is. So they align to a different framework, which we'll discuss in a bit. But this is more like, let's create equal opportunities. We cannot, it is not for us to help those who do not have the capacity to thrive, as long as we have created opportunities for people to thrive. So that is the focus of that kind of framework. And that's the focus of a policy made from that kind of thinking. So it is just to create an enabling environment for everyone to thrive. Whether or not people thrive is entirely their responsibility, and it's also tied to their capacity. So you're not going to be bothered about someone who is not willing to do something and just hoping to rely on the social welfare of the country, of the society. they're not really bent in the direction of social welfare as such. It's just about creating equal opportunities across board. So we have to start from that approach if we're thinking of making changes across board. Obviously, not to copy or borrow whatever is in the West, but these approach to thinking in political discourse is what forms the premise for policies and how policies are formed. And that's why there's debate in any Senate floor or any legislative body. It's stemming from where their normative ideology is. That is what influences their arguments as to what they want to do. So that's the first thing. But the second approach, which is the utilitarian approach, is more like what we were saying initially. How can we maximize the greatest good? The end should justify the means. It doesn't matter if one person has to suffer so that every other person gets the best. Okay, so this is the approach. And so the mindset there is that, this is they're thinking that the two contending factors that people are looking at in the society, and people are contending with the issues of pain and pleasure. And the objective of this utilitarian approach is to see how you can maximize pleasure and minimize pain. So it's called a consequentialist approach. Now, and what this consequentialist approach really is that they locate morality and the consequence of an act. So just like Tega said, it depends if the morality of that act of veering off the road is based on the fact that 5 people are saved. Now, none of these approaches is worse than the other, and some political parties have a bit of both, but they're leaned in one more than the other. So this is it. So they are different from the other political normative approach, which is called the justice approach or fairness approach, where they are not looking. These utilitarian guys are not looking to push rights. The first one that I talked about, which is the capabilities approach, they are looking to see that you can have the greatest right, how you can achieve the greatest rights for people. Whilst this utilitarian approach is more how you can achieve the greatest good. Okay, so, but the third approach, which is not looking to pursue rights or good, is just looking to pursue fairness. So that's the third one, and they're saying that in the justice approach is more like how can the social and economic equalities be arranged so that the benefit goes to the least advantage. Okay, yes, let everybody be equal, but let there be positive discrimination in favor of those who are least advantaged. And so that's where you have an ideology entrenched in a political party that is now thinking, okay, this is our approach, and so we're pushing welfare ahead of equal opportunities in terms of education or in terms of any other thing. Let's see how we can strengthen the least amongst us. How can we can strengthen the weak? So according to Rawls, the philosophy is that is what they call a difference principle, which is that inequality is justified to the extent that it benefits the worse. And so if you take it against some of the Western political movements, you have like the Democratic Party or the Labour Party in the UK. So that is the mindset. So it's different from the other one who say, no, equal opportunity for everybody, and you do as you, if you can thrive, you thrive. If you can't, equal opportunity, not equal outcome. But this other approach, which is the other end of it, is saying, no, let's look at creating an avenue for people who are weak amongst us to thrive. Okay, so that is really what it is. This is what we call positive discrimination and so on. There are other ones in Africa that we have as well, which is crucial to us as well. My slides are getting a bit stuck. So you have like the Ubuntu approach, and you have the Dharma Karma approach from the Indian philosophy. So the Ubuntu is more about framing empathy, solidarity, and it's what others could refer to as what I say nano philanthropy, and it's very common where a community of people come together and support each other. So you hear, oh, your whole family sent you to school, your whole village sent you to school. It's the approach of that I am because I'm human because I belong. So there's that sense of harmony and community that inspires our decisions and so on. Whilst the karma approach is that what you sow is what you reap, and as a result of that, people are inspired to make decisions that would yield about good solutions, not bad deeds, and so on. So these are some of the various approaches that really form our what I say, our normative framework and so on. But let me just conclude and just bring it down from this abstract to something a bit more clear so we can understand. So generally, this whole idea of framework is dealing with decisions about who counts, what counts, and how much that individual or the criteria counts. Now, if you look at the capability which I talked about, they're thinking everybody counts. The criteria for everybody to count is that there's freedom, and that's the central thing. Everybody weighs equal. So it would push everybody to do well. All right, so if everybody weighs equal in their contribution to the government, and so there should be equal taxes across board. No one part should be more. And it believes that, some level of inequality reflects the good and the needed incentive for those who are working hard, and sort of underpins the capitalist approach, because it's a reward for talent. By the time you can see that we all had equal opportunity, but I'm doing better than the next. So it's somewhat like it sort of fosters the pursuit of right, and whatever outcome comes out of it, go home with it. The utilitarian approach, I said, is, sorry. They believe that the act does not matter as long as the consequence of the act is good. So they align with the thinking that there is some level of inherent inequality in people, or there's some level of classes of people, and some people count more than others. And so it's important to help the strong so that the strong will be able to help the weak. And so let's cut taxes for the rich and the wealthy so that they can create a job for a vast majority of people. It's a kind of thinking. Now, these are things that we stumble into in our political process back in Nigeria or in Africa. We just stumble into decisions that cuts across distance, but it's not intentional enough for us to stay firm to any particular ideology or any kind of thinking. All right. So you have the justice approach as well, which believe that, well, everyone counts, but the least advantage should be given priority. And so the society should prioritize those who are least amongst them, or who have the biggest challenges amongst them, and so on. So that is their approach. They believe in leveling the playing field because they believe that many of the inequalities are corrosive to society, and they have impacts on the maintenance of privilege and all of those kind of things. So they are fostering what I say, fairness as opposed to rights, and so on and so forth. So all of these things are what we need to get right before we even start thinking of policies and so on. So this is the main chunk of it. Now, the other bits are going to be much, much quicker in terms of making a decision as to how we need to make policies. So first and foremost, we understand who we are. We can go back and we can see ourselves in different circumstances. And I'll probably give an exercise as we get on. We'll see ourselves in different decision sports where we are either turned to make a decision that aligns more with the capability, or aligns more with a utilitarian, or aligns more with a justice framework. And none of them is worse than the other. They all have their strengths, but this is what makes people align to different sects of political process. Now, until we have that clarity, where we don't align to a political party because we don't get a chance at a ticket, until we get that clarity as to what my ideology is and how that forms my thinking and how that reflects on the policies I make. And that's why you have a capitalist approach, a communist approach, a socialist, different approaches is based on what your underpinning ideology is. All right, now I think I've gone too far on this, so let's backtrack and go back to the next item, which is what do we need to change? All right, please, if you have any questions as we speak, just raise your hands and then I'll just take it as I speak. So what do we need to change? So that's the next thing. First of all, once we've identified what our framework is, the next thing is identify what we need to change. Now, policy analysis should always begin with diagnosing the underlying problem. Now, the common mistake that we make is we often try to start with a solution. Okay, let's start with a solution. Right? Let's look for a solution to this situation. But I think if we take a time to pause and identify what problem it is that we are trying to fix. So this is the what. The first thing is diagnose the problem. All right, identify what the problem is. Rather than trying to start with a solution, start with understanding the problem. And a lot of times we don't get to do that. A lot of times we just get on with get right on into the dance floor, and we just get engaged, and our views are limited. It's as opposed to when you come out from the dance floor, you go to the balcony, you have a wider view of the dance floor, of what's going on. So you start from first removing yourself from the situation and trying to identify what exactly is the problem. And that is a long process, which I'll show you in a bit. All right, hopefully not take that long in doing that. And then the second thing is, after identifying the problem, then you have to define the problem and define it as broadly as possible. So always start with large complex problem that you're trying to address. So that's the second thing you do. All right. And then the next thing is then you list all the potential causes. Now there's a system to do this. So this is not just a list of things to do. I'll explain to you, I'll show you the system on how we can do it in order to design policy. So the steps we've taken so far is understand what policies are and their role in change. And then secondly, understand who we are, how we think, and how we approach policy design. And now we're understanding what the problem is. Okay, identify the problem, define the problem as broadly as possible, all right? And then list all the potential causes. So, in the first step in designing and implementing policy solution is, first of all, analyzing why does this problem exist in the first place? Then call on all your expertise, on all the sources and the research evidence, all the data you have, and you've tried and find out how you can define, list all the potential causes, okay? And not just say the cause of the strike of the lack of jobs is because people are not going to school. There's more, there's several sub causes to that, all right? If you don't know enough about a problem, investigate and research further. And then after you've listed all the causes, you now need to group the causes into sub causes. I'll show you the process in a particular problem that is recent in Nigeria in a bit. Okay, so these are some of the things to do. Then you group at first glance, listing all potential causes might like be like a random assortment of problems. But what you need to do is you now put them into categories. All right, list, and then you can put it under the heading of corruption. You say, what's the problem in Nigeria? Oh, it's corruption. There's so much more to corruption. Oh, it's poverty. Oh, it's security. There's so much more. We can just list all those things and they stay in the abstract. But until we're able to name them, find the sub causes, the root causes, before we can come up with any policy that is meaningful. And that's why when we're having a recap before we started about what happened last Thursday in terms of talking about this policy, there were talks about policies that are made that are not followed. And one of the reasons that could be is because the policies themselves are not meaningful or they're not addressing the problem exactly. So there's, I told you about the policy design process, and we're going to go through them in a bit. But the first thing before we go into the PDP process is, first of all, understand what it is you're trying to change. Okay, that's it. Now, when you've done that, then you now do what is called a mapping exercise. So the mapping exercise is you map the causes and the sub-causes into what is called the Ishikawa diagram. I'll show that to you in a bit. So this is like, it's like a fish diagram. It's a useful tool that would, help you visualize the problem. Diagnosis, you visualize it, you know exactly what the problem is, and you know what the causes are, what the sub causes are, and what part of this problem you want to tackle that would have the most solution. All right, so you're identifying the problem causes that you want to address. All right, you want to know how to know what cause exactly do you want to address. So if you look in here, you see all these different things, they could all feed into the I don't know if I have laser pointer. Yeah. So right here, this could be the main problem. All right. This is the big problem, whatever you're trying to deal with. Now, these boxes are now the causes. You could say maybe corruption, maybe education, maybe security. But then there are sub-causes that feed into security, sub-causes that feed into corruption, sub-causes that feed into education, and so on and so forth. So this fish diagram, fishbone diagram, enables you to break down the complex problem into manageable issue areas that can then be addressed by the policy. Now, the challenge is we have policies that are designed to solve this, but we've not looked at all of these in their root causes. And for you to get to these root causes, you have to ask several questions, go through several processes, all right? Each of these is now a potential reason that might drive the problem, okay? These sub-causes are now potential drivers of the problem. Okay, that would provide a solution before you get to solution. So at this point, you have not even started thinking of solution. You're just thinking of understanding what exactly is going on. What is the problem with this? Why have we had ASO strikes for decades? What exactly is the problem? It's not about, now your approach to solving it would now be influenced by what your normative framework is, right? But if you don't intentionally identify what your normative framework is, you can't even get to this place of, first of all, identifying, how to solve the problem and so on and so forth. All right, now in identifying the problem causes to address, there could be several solutions. All right, there's several mechanisms, or rather several issues that are touching a particular problem. Okay, so what this diagram that I showed you helps you deconstruct the problems into smaller bits. That way you're able to take a fresh look at the problem, and well, in breaking down the problem into smaller parts, it's more manageable. It lays foundation for you to start to formulate policy solutions. So you don't just start with a solution, you start with the problem. When you create that diagram of your own, then you start unpacking the different causes and the different sub-causes, and then you start to find inroads to a solution. And then you have to appreciate that you consider the status quo as well. Because sometimes when analyzing a policy solution, you might find that the status quo is better than the solution that is being preferred. Perhaps the status quo has not just been implemented with fidelity. So you have to look at that as well. That have you followed the change as was intended? And in getting all this solution, in identifying the problem, you cannot rule away the role of statistics. Okay, you can't move from the importance of statistics, because it will help us to pause. So this is where you do your research. Now, the problem we have a lot of times is that we just get onto solutions without thinking of the problem. And even when we think of the problem, we don't try, we think of it in the abstract. We don't break it down to the nitty-gritty of it and try to find out the exact aspects of the problem, that what exactly is causing it. Statistics helps us do that, data. And we have what is being referred to globally as an evidence revolution, because there is just a plurality of data across the board. Okay, so there's enough data that would help us pause, observe the world around us before acting on it. But what we do is that we just get on with a knee-jerk reaction, and a knee-jerk reaction to a potential problem is oftentimes not sustainable. Okay, so you start with, you start with that part of looking at exactly what the problem is, rather than starting with solutions. Start with understanding the problem, and in understanding the problem, you need data. All right, so we need to move. Every time we think of data, we think of data protection. We think of safeguarding data. We think of data. Oh, our details are everywhere, and this is somewhat disempowering. And we can change our perspective to how we see data, that we are not just passive producers of data, as is often the case for majority of the people, but how can we be active consumers of data? How can we look at data across the board, and how can we use that to inform us on what the problem is? Because there's information everywhere as to what the problem is across a variety of issues. So we need to start from that point. Let us be active consumers of data. Looking for the problem from data, from research, and you can start from leveraging, administrative data that is available. Lots of government agencies already have data that are accessible to the public. That is one aspect. You have to leverage the descriptive evidence, the data that's available, in order to better understand issues and then make informed decisions. So to do that, you start by leveraging the administrative data that is available. And then you can now move from that to leverage on what is called the non-traditional sources of data. From phone calls, from Facebook, from social media. There's so much data from Google. These are all data that is available across board. In 2014, there was more than 2.5 quintillion data produced every day. Now, in the past 2 years, data has been produced by nearly double the percentage. So you're thinking of data that is everywhere. In fact, satellite imagery is now a new form for determining poverty in areas. So when they look up and they see the amount of darkness in a particular location, it's an indication of lack of economic activity that dovetails into poverty. So there was a time that North Korea came up with saying that their growth for the year was 250 something percentage. But then when NASA did their satellite imagery of China and South Korea, you see light, and then right in between both of them, you see gross darkness. So it's an indication that the economic activity in between in that location geographically is an indication of the level of poverty that they are probably dealing with. So there are different ways that you can get data, and all of these are accessible. So we need to now get the skills to critically consume data and evidence. It is that thinking we need to get to now, that how do we consume data in order to identify the what? Remember, we're still dealing with the what, okay? So that's it. And then now we move on to the how. So first of all, we've understood what it is. Now the question is the how. Now the how is the policy design process I told about. And it's an arc. It has three things that you need to look at. Three things that you need to consider in dealing with facilitating change in terms of making the policy, planning the policy. One, the policy must be technically aligned. Number two, the policy must be institutionally aligned. I would explain all of these. And then number three, it must be stakeholders aligned. Now, because these are the three things that would make any policy to be worth the while. Now, a lot of times, remember, policy, the status quo at the minute for a lot of policy, and there is data to support what I'm saying, is that with all these processes I have mentioned so far are skipped. We haven't even gotten to the part. All these processes are skipped, and you just go on, oh, this is the problem, let's get the solution. All right, and then we just go on. But if you follow this process, understand what the policy is supposed to do, understand who you are and what your political leaning is, and then understand what the problem is, and that's a long process, then you now understand how to do it. So in terms of determining the solution, you have to that triangle of policy. So it has to fit that triangle of good policy, the alignment on all sides. So first of all, the alignment in terms of technically, it has to be technically correct. Okay, then you now go to the stakeholder aligned, and then it has to be lastly institutionally aligned. I'll explain all of them before, so in a bit. So not every policy is feasible. You understand? Not every policy is feasible. You come up with a solution. There are various examples of policies that haven't been feasible, and we can look at them in a bit. You know, there's several policies that, you know, don't work. I'm mindful that I have a short time, so I'm going to round up any minute now, and I've been talking a long time. But I hope we're following the line of thinking, and I'm sure this slides will be made available to you. All right. So not every policy is feasible. So you need to now think that your policy design, you know, you have gone through the systematic thinking, you've carefully analyzed, and you've structured your approach in a way that is technically aligned, stakeholder aligned, and institutionally aligned in the pursuit of whatever your goal is. So that's what you need to do. Now, in terms of it being technically aligned, explaining what it means for the policy to be technically aligned, it is technically aligned if, you know, assuming it's implemented with fidelity, okay, to the design, assuming it is done as it's intended to be, right, the policy would achieve its desired outcome. All right. In other words, the policy would have the desired impact on the problem that you're trying to solve. All right. To assess, you know, the technically correctness or alignment of it, it's first for you to understand what the problem you're trying to solve, and then what the potential policy options you're weighing. So it's not just one policy option you're looking at. There are many options you look at, many ways, you know, there's many ways to skin a cat. There are many solutions to a particular problem. Which one does it most? All right. So depending on the policy problem at hand, you want to find out, if I do this, then would this happen? That's the approach you take to seeing that the policy actually works. So if I give the lecturers their salary, then would the strike be called off? Yes, it may be, but would that guarantee that there will be no more strikes in the future? So would the salaries, increasing workers' salary, would that be a solution? So you're thinking of, and there are different options. So you look at it from that perspective. Then you want to look at whether the stakeholders aligned. So with regards to stakeholder alignment, there are different aspects of the society. There are key stakeholders. First of all, when you're looking at stakeholders, you have the public sector, you have the private sector, you have the third sector. So you have the government, you have the private sector that has the market, and then you have the civil society. So these are the three main areas. And every time you make policies, each and every one of them would impact on some of these various sectors of the society. So it's important that you want to see that, what are the weakness of the market or the government or the society is key to understand whether this policy would work, and whether the people that are stakeholders that are going to implement this policy would buy into it and would run with it. So last year, there was the new law, CAMA 2020, which was going to hold the third sector more accountable in a way that there was a lot of uprising against it. Now, that policy might have been technically correct, but was it stakeholder aligned? Because so that's what you want to see, whether the policy you're trying to make would be aligned, otherwise it would fail. All right, so you then need to visually represent this, and I'll show you all of this very briefly. I'm beginning to speed because I know we have a short time. And then lastly, you want to find out whether it's institutionally aligned. So you found out that all the stakeholders agree it's politically supportable, and by politics, you're referring to all the stakeholders. They've all agreed to it. They agreed, they agreed to follow the policy. They're not good. You don't have a lot of attack from the public or from the market, and the market includes both individuals and businesses. Okay, so you've looked at all of these and you've determined that, okay, this is stakeholder aligned. Now the question is, the people who are going to carry out this policy, are they equipped to deliver on this policy? So this is the PDP process that you need to go through, the policy design process you need to go through to check that your policy is working. This is because we're talking about design and policy now, right? So this is the process. You want to see whether it is institutionally aligned, and you can determine that where the agencies that are tasked with carrying out or enforcing the policy have the capacity to do so in a way that would generate the desired outcome. Now, this would include people, human resources, whether they have the people, whether they have the relationships, whether they have the network to bring about the change according to the policy, whether they have the resources, the intellectual resources, the financial, the social influence to be able to enact the policy with fidelity to the design. So that is that. So, for you to do that, you now need to have specific actions that are required by different agencies that you're looking to deliver on this work. And so you see whether these people can tick this box in terms of what these actions are, and whether they have the capacity to carry out these actions. And if they do so, would the policy have its desired outcome? So until you've ticked these three processes, then you can determine whether or not you have a policy that works. Lastly, and I'm going to be very brief with that, is when do you then affect the change? First and foremost, you have to do the alignment test to be sure that the stakeholders and the institutions and that's the organization that will implement it and the technicality of the policy work. All right. So sometimes the stakeholders and institutions are aligned, but it's not technically aligned. So imagine, for instance, you provide textbooks to school, but the problem isn't that there are no textbooks, it's that maybe teachers are not showing up to teach. All right. So that problem is technically incorrect. Even though there's a capacity to deliver the textbook, there is the people to deliver the textbook, people are happy with the solutions, but the people, the solution that is needed is not textbooks at the minute. So the policy does not really address the main constraint on quality education, because it's you have the textbooks to teach, but the problem is that where are the teachers to teach? So that is a situation where the stakeholder is aligned, institutionally aligned, but it's not, the solution is not quite fitting. Okay. Another one is where, it's technically correct, it's institutionally aligned, but the stakeholders are not there. So you have take for instance, a common one is in the United States, for instance, you've had this gun control laws. Everybody's of the view that yes, there should be more checks, background checks for gun purchases in the US. There are more talks around that. But the concern is they don't have the support from the NRA, that's the gun manufacturers and the gun lobbyist group. And so it makes it impossible for that law to ever come to because even though it's technically correct, they have the institutions to do the background check and deliver it, but it's not stakeholder aligned. All right, so then you've not got the quite got the policy there. And then lastly, you could have a situation where it is technically aligned, as the stakeholders are there, but you don't have the capacity to deliver it. So you could have those kind of things now. So you come up with a fancy idea, but there is not the capacity to deliver it. All right, so there are various examples of that across board. So first thing in doing and recommending the policy is first of all going through this test and so on. And then lastly, you go to what's it called? And you then take action. And taking action is crucial because this part deals with grassroots leadership. And I think that's what we're doing here. And these are action points that we need to then do to be sure that we are all in the right place. So first of all, understand what your normative framework is. Understand what the problem is. Then you design a solution, as we have said, to see that it aligns. Then you now recommend a solution through the right channels. Now you need to understand what the democratic process is. We can hold our political leaders more accountable, forgetting those at the top and looking at those at our local government. And how can we fashion solutions for problems that are affecting our immediate locality and channel that recommendation to them? And this is where we come to the capstone project, which we'll be dealing with later on this program. Yeah, so that's the last thing. I'm just going to show you. Yeah, so that's it. I'm just waiting for questions. And whilst that is, I'm just going to show you an example of a policy design process very briefly, and then I'm done for today. But in the meantime, I'll take questions whilst I'm opening up that screen. I'll take any questions if you have any.
Thank you very much, Dr. Uche.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so if you're having any questions, do all to put up your hand to signify, so we'll call you out to ask your questions.
I'm just going to show you, whilst we're waiting for the question, I'm just going to show you a quick example of what I've said about this process, how it's been done before you then make a recommendation, before you look at the policy. So this, I'll look at it very briefly, less than 5 minutes, I think. And then whilst you bring up your questions. So we just, this is a, let's look at the voluntary sector now. Can you see the new screen? Derek, can you see the new screen? Yeah. Okay. So this is what I was telling you now. This is an example of what I was saying, filling up that Ishikawa program now. So you're looking at problems within the voluntary sector. So what are the issues? Is it that there's animosity between the government? There's a government disconnection from the sector. That's why you had all that palaver that went on? Is it that the sector, the voluntary sector, do not have enough resources, or are there fragile ecosystems, or is there just breakdown of trust? You don't know what people are doing with your money or tithes, your offerings. You don't know what anybody's doing with it. So there's all of that there. We can just leave it at that, but we can now go into smaller issues that feed into those bigger problems. So what are the smaller issues that feed into those bigger problems? So maybe the ecosystem is wrong. Maybe there is no shared focus. So the private sector is not engaging more with the voluntary sector, and the voluntary sector is not engaging with the government. Maybe we don't have enough workforce because there's lack of education or relevant skilled workforce. Maybe that's why you don't have a strong ecosystem. Or maybe the reason there's lack of resources is because people do not have enough appetite for voluntary work due to high rate of poverty. That's again another problem. Or maybe there is no empowerment by the government. So you look at all these sub courses, and then what you do is not tackle this big problem, nor do you tackle this medium-sized problem. What you tackle is one of these tiny smaller problems, right? You just focus on one of the smaller problems, and you decide that by doing this, you look at those smaller problems are called like leverage points. These are various leverage points in the big problem. So you decide that and you do this. Okay, maybe we look at the lack of shared focus, or maybe it's a lack of vision, organizational accountability. Maybe that's one of the issues you want to look at. Maybe, so these are three issues, and you now look at what is promising about these issues and how this would impact on the overall problem. So you explain and all this I fed by data before you arrive at this point. So you're determining which of these leverage points to deal with. All right. In trying to determine it, you quiz each one and you come up with solutions for each single one of them. And then you say, okay, this is what you want to deal with. You have the leverage points that you want to deal with is just the first one, right? And then you now come up with solutions. Now you map out several solutions, and then you come up with maybe the top 3 solutions. So different things that you look at, and you say, okay, you want to focus on maybe if the sector has a multi-stakeholder commission, it would help deal with the challenge. So if the voluntary sector actors are part of the decision, are part of the accountability process, are part of the monitoring process, maybe there'll be more buy-in into it. It will help. So you look at that, maybe you want to look at that. Then you start to think of solutions. So that way now start looking at whether the stakeholders are aligned to it. You come up with different aspects of this, the solutions. You expand on the solutions that you have, all right? And then you can now come up with like a theory of change. So you've come up with this solution. If you do this, what would happen? Maybe this would create a sense of belonging. Then this would have, so you come up with your intervention, which is what you want to do to solve the problem. Your intervention, you come up with that, and that leads to an output, all right? This would have an immediate output. And then what's the next thing? The outcome of that output leading to a solution. You're still not going on to solve the big problem. You're just still dealing with a small issue. And you come up with that. You've still not provided a solution. You're just interrogating your options, right? Before you now go on to, let's move on to the next bit. Okay, so when you get to this bit, then you now break down that intervention you had and the immediate output and the various outcomes you're looking at. You create something like a log frame, and then you have the various indicators that lets you know that all these things are working, and then you come up with a solution from that point. And then you move on to the next thing there. And then you now check whether it's technically aligned. You make a brief to ensure that it's aligned, to show that what you're trying to do would actually solve the problem. Then you now see who are the various stakeholders that are involved in this decision you're making. This is just going through the technical alignment part, and you're looking at the various stakeholders. How will these stakeholders be affected by this solution, and how can they how can these stakeholders affect the adoption? What are their power play? So what happens with the civil society? What are their interests? What are their incentives? So you're looking at that. You're looking at the various aspects of government and how they deal with this solution. So you're looking at that. You move on to the private sector, various stakeholders as well, down to the citizenry, down to the international community and so on. You're looking at all the stakeholders that would be impacted by one single decision. You're not just saying this is what we need. You're going, this is how you design the policy. You break it down before you then move on to now see what their power play is. And you see which of these stakeholders have high influence and do they support, or which ones have low influence and do they not support, and you engage it so you know who you're recommending your policy to and who has influence to change, to make a change. So you're not just, you come up with this matrix. So this is the process of coming up with a solution for one problem of a bigger problem. You've gone to the tiny bit of it, and then you now see whether it's institution, who is going to implement it, what are the steps for it to be implemented, who is responsible, and what capacities do they have, do they need to have, and then after that, then you make your recommendation. So that's an example of how to come about a policy. All right, Adekunle, sorry, I know your hand has been up. I just want to finish that. Yeah, go on, Kunle.
Thank you very much, Uche. So it has been a very wonderful session. Yeah, regarding the issue of policy implementation, I have a question. I would like to ask a question in reference to a policy that was implemented recently in Nigeria. And it's the Central Bank of Nigeria's Anchors Borrowers Program. That is the program in which they give farmers loan in the form of agricultural input and farm inputs. Now, having studied the policy and followed it closely over the course of 4 to 5 years that it has been established, and there are some major, based on what you explained now, that when we look at the problem definition, there are some sub causes. I mean, what are the causes of the problem? And definitely there have to be some sub causes also. So I think the main problem the government is trying to tackle in that aspect is the problem of food insufficiency. That is, we have not been able to produce food that is enough to sustain us as a nation. And the solution they came up with was to give loan to farmers in the form of agricultural inputs and not what is it called? And not just the funds directly. I mean, they provide loans to them in the form of fertilizers, chemicals, seeds, and so on. Back to my question now. Some of the sub-causes that has been set to the program over the years. And, we have the issue of poverty. Now, when I talk about poverty, most of these farmers who are getting these agricultural inputs in the first place, majority of them are not actually going back to the farm to use them. Majority of them, even those who are using them, some they have to sell part of these inputs in order to be able to meet up with their family, their immediate family needs, because majority of them, their cash is trapped. They don't really have the money to sustain their family. Another issue is the issue of the climate change, which we know is actually affecting the whole world right now. Then there's also the issue of pest control, which that program did not really factor in terms of implementation. And one thing again is the issue of migration, because when we look at Nigeria these days, people in the rural area, they prefer moving to the urban area. Let's just go to the urban area and start. I mean, let's just go there together, rough it together, whatever it is we can make there, let's mix together. So these are some of the problems I have identified with the policy. Now, my question is this: looking at these 4 issues now, the issue of poverty, climate change, pest control, and migration, where exactly do you think, if the government is to revisit the program now, because actually, if you are to rate the program in terms of success, we can't give it 50%, because there have been several complaints. I mean, there have been complaints severally that majority of these farmers who take this loan, majority of them, they abscond. And those who have not even absconded, they have defaulted in paying back. And what they are actually use, what they are actually supposed to use in paying back is in terms of harvest. Like maybe for instance, I'm a rice farmer. I received the loan in form of input. I'm supposed to pay it back with some of my harvest, the rice harvest on my farm. So the majority of them, they have defaulted. So looking at all of this now, the issue of poverty, migration, climate, and pests, where exactly do you think, if the government is to revisit this policy, where should they start tackling this problem? Because I believe without tackling all of these things, and definitely there's no way that policy can succeed. That's my question.
All right, excellent example there and question there, Deconley. Excellent, very excellent example, and that is an example of potentially, I don't know the details of that particular policy solution, but that is potentially a solution that is not quite technically aligned. They have the institutional alignment in the sense that they have the capacity to actually give the loans, right? They have, to some extent, some stakeholders alignment in terms of the farmers want the loans, the government and the other decision makers have the capacity to are aligned and not opposed to the idea, and that's how come it's passed. Now, the technical correctness of that now becomes problematic because you don't just throw money at problems. So again, if they had gone through all this process, what you have said, Deconley, it's cool because you've actually taken steps to identify causes and even sub-causes of that problem. Now you find that you don't have to solve the whole problem. And that is the, otherwise you get into an analysis paralysis where you're trying to solve everything, or you get stuck in trying to move a mountain. Sometimes you just need to move the pin forward. You might just want to address pests, or you might just want to address something in relation to climate. Now, this now goes back to what your normative framework is. If you're thinking, oh, I just want to do have something, let the people get money immediately, well, that doesn't quite solve the problem in terms of providing a balanced level playing field for everybody and for the crops to actually thrive as well. So there are various moving parts here, and it goes down to what we're saying. So I can't say let's them tackle the climate change first, or tackle maybe even education, agricultural education for the farmers who are looking, or maybe innovation and technology to assist with farming and all of that. There are different aspects, moving parts here that could be tackled. So the question is, going through, if it was up to you, what would you do? So it now boils down to you. It boils down to what you think. Are you saying that, well, you don't care if the people, not like you don't care, but you don't think the solution now is for the people to have an immediate gratification with money, but that we should hold on until you come up with a clear framework that is sustainable? If your normative framework doesn't align with that approach, you could come with another approach that equally works. So you see how they all fit into coming up with a solution. So I can't say tackle the finances or climate or pests or people absconding with funds and processes to monitoring end user funds. All of those could be tackled independently, and each of them should then have their policy arc or their policy design process that now ticks all these boxes. And when you come up with your technical brief, your technical alignment brief, you can answer all these questions. Okay, maybe that or this would work. So I don't know if that gives you, I think you can now take this material and then use it. And that's what's going to happen with the capstone project anyways, is all what we've been learning, we then need to come up with a problem. And we're looking for just one part of that problem we want to tackle. So we come up with the leverage point. We trying to identify what the leverage point is. We've been talking about poverty, but poverty itself is huge. There's several things that feed into that, or corruption, several things feed into that. Police brutality, several things feed into that. So you don't have to solve all that big issues. Just go to the tiny bit. What is it that you want to tackle that would have a ripple effect on all of these? So that's how that would work. Yeah, I don't know if that provides some light at all. Yeah, yeah, thank you. Any more questions? Okay, I know we have a few minutes to go, but you know, these materials and the videos I believe would be available for us to look at a later point. But the point I'm just going to make is, so all of these things that we've learned is about the entire Song Institute program is not to churn out theory. And over the past weeks, we've learned amazing things as it deals with leadership and governance, as it deals with innovation and development, as it deals with policy design and implementation, as it deals with history, continuity, culture, and legacy. We've touched on all of those things. Now, the next phase is the most crucial phase of this journey, and that is you coming up with a solution to a problem, a problem that is close to you. So all of this is, you can look at it and just tackle all of these, you know, come up with a big, with a policy design act after you've interrogated what your problem is, what the problem is, after you've interrogated what your normative framework is, after you've interrogated what you want to achieve by any policy, then you start with understanding the problem. And then you now come up with that arc, which the Ishikawa diagram or the fishbone diagram, where you now list the potential problems. Then when you're coming up with a solution, you now use what you've learned with innovation and development, with leadership and governance, with history, continuity, culture, and legacy, and this. Use that to formulate a solution. And then you come up with 2, 3, 4 solutions, and then you weigh them. And before you come up with a policy solution that has gone through that rigorous process, and then you have a policy that is meaningful, that would work, and that is sustainable. And that way we can have effective change. Yeah, I think that's, yeah. Yeah, Richard, please.
Dr. Uche, thank you. Thank you so much. Very good. Thank you. Very good. So my question is piggybacking on what the previous gentleman asked. These frameworks, these models, and these approaches have been in existence for as long as, obviously going through processes of iteration, giving the presentable circumstance or wider changes affecting the development of societies. So how come, therefore, with particularly focusing on the Ishikawa analysis and the process flow, how come corporate organizations, institutions, as well as governments, particularly in the developing world, such as Nigeria and whatever, where it has been well documented that it has the highest number of educated persons or professors or people in the academia, how come policies have either continually failed in delivering the desired outcomes or have failed at the point of implementation? Where, therefore, lies the problem?
Thank you. Thank you. Excellent question, Richard. And I'll just say this quickly. You see, two things come to mind. One, experience, they often say, is the best teacher. But I read a book recently that said experience is not quite the best teacher. that is evaluated experience that is the best teacher. So let's pack that for a second and come back to it. Second thing is, they say information is power. And then it's also reported that information itself is not power. It is applied information that is power. Okay, so that then you can then pack that again. And the fact that these information are there, and they are there really in the public domain. The question is whether it is being used. There's a joke or an analysis about if Africa or we Africans were to create the world, assuming we're taking in quotes the place of God, when God wanted to create the world, right? His intention from the start was to create man. That was the end point, right? Permit me to use this analogy. So the intention from the start was to create man, but he didn't do it in the first, second, third, fourth, or fifth day. He first started to create an environment for man to thrive. He first started by dealing with the chaos. So the whole world was full of chaos and dark, and then he first of all put light. And then he started to arrange things. So he put the waters in the right places, put the trees in the right places. Then he created animals. Then he created all those things. And then when everything was beautiful, then he created man. All right. They said if it was an African doing it, I would just create man on day one. Then man said, I need light, don't create light. I need water, and then we just react as we go. All right. So this is a paradigm I'm hoping we shift from. But the thing is, the ideas are there, but there's a sense of shortcut, and shortcut oftentimes cuts short. And that is the challenge that we're facing. So it's not as though there is, the solution is not there or the information is not there. We have the capacity. I mean, of all the resources in Africa, I think our greatest resources are the human resources. We have the capacity across board to thrive as the beacon, for the whole world to follow. But we want to do a shortcut, want to do, even to fill a form, we don't want to fill it. We just want to jump the queue, want to do. So this feeds into our approach to policy. And that's why we end SARS one day and we come up with, what was it? SWAT, in another day, you see? That's a big change that requires a rigorous process. You don't just change, from SARS, So, this is it. We just make decisions and then we think of consequences later. And sometimes we just, again, it goes back to the mistake I said about that people make, which is starting with the solutions. You don't start with, we don't even understand the problem. We know it in the abstract, but if you tell us to bring down our problem to the concrete and say what exactly it is, interrogate it, we probably will struggle. We have an idea of what the problem is. We know, generally speaking, there's corruption, there's poverty, there is this, but again, a mindset shift. Thank you, Richard. I think that is absolutely correct. The revolution we need is a mind revolution, and and everybody has to do their bit. Okay, and that's what Song is doing. It's a mind revolution. That's what we need, where everybody decides that, look, we're going to think differently. We're going to do things differently from the way we've done it, and not just hope things would change by themselves. And if we think of, if you look at the journey, I'm just going to end with this because I know time is gone. But if you look at the journey with Song, right? Song Africa. So with all of these things that we're doing, all this, at this point, when we get into the capstone project, which I'm hoping that everybody would engage in and come up with a document that addresses a particular problem. Now, all this problem now goes into a think tank. So we're effectively doing our 2 pence. We're giving our 2 kobo rather, to see that we're adding our bits to the solution. You know, it's like when we think of the pledge, we're talking about a pledge, our pledge in Nigeria. Say, I pledge to Nigeria, my country, to be faithful, to be loyal, to be honest, to serve Nigeria with all my strength, to defend her unity, to uphold her honor and her glory. So we think of these things. But when we look at these values that are entrenched in the pledge, we don't apply it when we our daily livings. The idea of service is not there. Loyalty, faithfulness, all of those things are not there anymore. The sense of defending a unity or upholding an honor, upholding a glory, what excellence has no place. We just want to, you know, shortcut. That's why Nollywood can produce 10 movies in a day. But then you see the difference with some aspects of Nollywood, and they've stood out, and that spend time produce something, and they're competitive even in the international market. All right, so it is that time, you know, you don't just, you know, I guess the solution really is actually doing, not knowing, and we know a lot, we just don't do. Yeah. Yeah, I like what you said, an Indomie noodles approach. Yeah, we just want to do it quickly, but we need to do more rather than know. So yeah, and it starts with you. So if after hearing all these things that we've learned for song and we just pack it and shelve it, we are part of the problem. But if we look at all these things and we say, okay, let's tackle some, let's do something, not just know about it, then we're part of the solution. Yeah, that's me done.